I thought it'd be interesting to try and film a video on a 150-500. So we're shooting this, I think this is at 300mm on the Sony FX3. But, we'll start the video. The 150-500s are an incredibly popular lens. One, because they offer a huge focal length, a huge focal range for their price. However, some people definitely suck at using them. And it's okay. There's some pretty technical reasons about why your images might be rubbish out of a 150-500, but in this video, we're going to answer them for you. First up is shutter speed. Now, if you're Googling using a high zoom lens for the first time, you'll hear about the shutter speed focal length rule. I can't even remember what it's called. But essentially, the principle of it is you need to keep your shutter speed higher than whatever focal length you're at. For example, if you're at 100mm, you need to have your shutter speed at least 1/100th of a second. If you go up to 500mm, you need to have your shutter speed at 1/500th of a second. However, there's some flaws to this. First of all, if you're using a crop sensor camera, you need to factor this into the equation. The maths on this can frustrate some people, but essentially if you use Google search, your camera model plus crop factor, it should come up telling you what it is. And it's most likely a full frame sensor, no crop factor, or an APS-C sensor, which it might be 1.5 or 1.6 times crop factor. What you then need to do is multiply that rule by that crop factor. For example, if at 100mm on a crop sensor camera, you need to have your shutter speed not at 1/100th of a second, but at 1.5 times that, so 150th of a second. 500mm, you need to go 1.5 times that, so would that be 750th of a second. However, this normally is not sharp enough or high enough of a shutter speed to freeze the motion of the content you're trying to capture. For example, people playing sport, birds in flight, they're going to need a much higher shutter speed than this. Even if you're shooting a relatively stationary subject, I would nearly double it. If you're at 500mm, try and be around 1/1000th of a second at least to just get sharp shots. That was a long-winded one, eh, Bonds? Yeah. Next, we have some technical elements pretty much summed up as diffraction. Now, I'm going to try and really simplify this, but essentially, if you use this lens at the brightest or darkest aperture, it's going to result in blurrier images. Don't shoot it at f5.6 every chance you get. Try and sit maybe around f8, f9. If you go right up to f18, which I don't imagine would be common, you'll also get some softer images. But there's a lot more to diffraction than just getting the middle range of the aperture. Diffraction can be also caused by using the extreme focal ranges of your lens. For example, if you shoot at 150 or 500 a lot, you'll get a lot more diffraction. Instead, try shooting at 200 to 450 and you'll notice diffraction from the focal range reduces quite a bit. I know this is all very complex. We're going to explain how to apply this to your photos to get things really sharp at the end of the video. Now I've got to walk all the way back to stop recording and grab my camera. Finally, diffraction is really emphasized by having too many megapixels on your sensor. Essentially what diffraction does is it splits your image so it covers a slightly larger area. It makes things look blurry. And if you have more and more pixels in a smaller sensor, it really emphasizes those little blurs to make things look worse. So I'm not saying high megapixel sensors are poorer at taking photos. I'm just saying lenses will have a limitation of how many megapixels they can resolve, and 150-500s normally hit that limitation earlier than more expensive lenses. Now there's a bit of an exception or a kind of a loophole, a rule around this, and that's photography versus videography. See, 1080p video is the equivalent of, I don't know, not many megapixels. 4K video is the equivalent of about 8 megapixels. So if you might see videos out of this lens that look incredibly sharp at any aperture, any focal range, and it's because they hardly need to resolve anywhere near as much detail as a photo does. So for video, much easier to use, provided you can keep it steady. But let's make this all make sense and beneficial to you. So how do you combine all this knowledge to get the best possible results? Well, the answer is you test each setting, each option individually. Play with just your shutter speed and nothing else and see how high of a shutter speed you need to get depending on your content to get sharp results. Do the same with only changing aperture, focal range, your height from the ground, the time of the day you're photographing at. Each component individually, see which one gives the best results. If you can, of the same subject, I understand easier said than done, and rule out each factor individually. Part of it, unfortunately, is you just also need to lower your expectations, as things like diffraction are a limitation of the price. This is the reason this lens isn't 10 grand, is because you are limited by your price to a point. However, you can still get phenomenal results if you test each component individually. You'll eventually get there and you'll start to get stunning results.